and welcome everybody. Really excited to have everybody here today. I'm Whit. I'm a senior director here at the Marketing Center of Excellence, and I see people are starting to kind of put your names and titles and companies, please, in the chat. That's great to see. Really excited to have a really dynamic group here today, focused on discussing community marketing. Today we're really drilling into more of the product-led growth use case, but obviously community marketing is an area where we're seeing a lot of growth and just an explosion of interest across B2B SaaS. So really excited to bring in some experts in here today to talk about we're gonna go through how to think about community and how to get it started and for your organization. We're also going to talk about different ways to engage your community and really drive growth. And then finally around measurement and also reporting components as well. So just wanted to introduce both Tomer and Mac. And so if you guys could just get on the video and just introduce yourself. Tomer, please go first.
Thank you, Whit. So my name is Tomer. I'm the founder and chief product officer of Dremio, which is a SQL lakehouse.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Mac. I'm the founder and CEO of Commsor, and we're the I guess community operating systems. What do we call ourselves? We're like the data backend for community teams.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. You'll be hearing from both of them a little bit later in the presentation. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A as we go. We'll also have some time at the end as well. Just to kick things off, we're going to start with a poll to just kind of level set and understand exactly where everyone is in their community marketing journey. Let me see if I can find these. Christina, do you know where these are?
We actually are not going to do a poll. It did not load.
Okay. Well, I guess we're not doing the poll today, which is fine. If again, they're kind of each person's companies in their different stages of their journey for community. But today we'll go over the overview about how to do it. So let me just get up this presentation here. Second, we'll just switch that over. Great. So today's topic is activating community for product-led growth companies. And really that we're going to be discussing today is how to build an organic flywheel around your community and drive actual business pipeline from it. So again, a very highly growth stage space right now in motion that's generally new in the market from what we're seeing. And we're seeing a lot of interesting trends around the portfolio. So just a level set here, product-led growth just gets thrown around as a buzzword a lot in B2B SaaS. The thing to know is that product-led growth is more than just selling through the product. It really is the evolution of revenue generation. So PLG is a concept of using product and revenue model design to engage, acquire, and upsell your customers. PLG is not just a free trial or freemium product. It relies on the product itself as the primary driver of customer engagement and expansion. Some people on the line, feel free to please put in the chat if you're currently using a PLG model or something you're evaluating appropriately. The reason why you would do that is effective PLG growth really helps you labor the revenue engine. It empowers your end users to find, evaluate, and adopt your product on their own, and equips your sales, success, and marketing teams with data. And that's really the key point. We'll be talking about that more around the data piece, because that's what we're really seeing companies who succeed in this space. And they're connecting the data pipes with the community over to the revenue. Mainly, we see PLG used for customer acquisition, scalably and effectively acquire customers with free product or trial motion. Also in sales, so automated revenue generation engine. And then finally, empowering sales and customer success teams. So giving them the insights to help drive engagement. So when you think about PLG, it can be a useful lever to achieve a couple of key objectives. So one is just overall lower acquisition costs. It allows the product to do the work of sourcing and qualifying leads. And this will allow you to win more customers with fewer resources over time. Now, obviously, if your product is not built for PLG upfront, that will require some pretty significant rethinking and investment. But the net overview is a net overall gain is in the long term, you'll see lower acquisition costs. Two is around improved sales efficiency. So you increase the size of your funnel. You provide the sales team with data and the highest potential targets. And then three is around reduction in churn for large accounts. So because you have people using the PLG motion, you have the data, and you can create stickiness around it and just overall advocacy within the organization. Again, we'll show you some examples of that later in the presentation. So why community and why does it connect to product-led growth? Actually, community marketing has a lot of the similar objectives as PLG. They kind of go hand in hand, but you do see companies that don't have PLG motions leveraging community as well. The goal of community is really, we got 5 different points here. One is to create clear pathways for frequent customer feedback and advocacy. You get nice transparency and you get customer feedback that you can actually analyze and surface within your organization. 2 is building that organic flywheel of content adoption, usage, and referral. So companies that have strong community motions generally have referrals, word of mouth, and overall just their communities contributing to content as well. 3 is reducing the dependency of paid channels. So if you have a strong organic flywheel of community, you don't have to go out into the market and spend as much money on AdWords and other paid advertising. 4 is allowing for product adoption in larger enterprise accounts. So we talk about a bit of land and expand, or you have a bottoms up, top down. So communities, strong community motions allow for low friction adoption, and then that feeds over to the top down enterprise sale. And then finally is nurturing product stickiness, customer retention, all those things, expansion. So, again, if you have a good community, they're spreading your product throughout the organization. If people try and love your product and they're spreading the word, they generally have high retention. So this is Scales, the Insight Snow Owl, and just giving kind of a warning a bit. So not every company is qualified to build a vibrant user community. So I think it's really important to really kind of nail down who you're targeting and who is the best fit for this. So I think it's easy to say, okay, I want to do community marketing, but you really have to take a step back and determine whether community is the right fit for you and your product. So we have a compelling value proposition, but ultimately you need to get user adoption, right? And engage a broader ecosystem beyond just your product. So generally what we recommend is you take a look at your current customers, right? So you see where your product usage is the highest within your core group of customers, and then look at the usage and see what the persona is and whether there is a broader traction within that and use case that exists beyond your product. This can be helpful as you're evaluating new verticals, because if you find a more horizontal use case, you can apply that and spread the word. 2 is just generally end users first, right? So you want people who are subject matter experts and engaged in their field to be contributing to the community conversation. Usually if you have economic buyers, unless they're highly technical, you should be adding them to more of a customer advisory board level and not as much on community. But again, if they are highly technical and use the product and love it, definitely wrap them in. And then 3 is the knowledge gap. This is really critical. So you can get your customers on a customer community, and I think Max can talk a little bit more about what that looks like later in the presentation. But when you think about the knowledge gaps, you really want to look at where the market exists beyond your product and your customers, and thinking about what the gaps are, because topics must really be more product agnostic and help attract observers who may not even know what your brand or your product is. So we've provided this handy worksheet you can kind of use to determine who your ideal community user profile. When we talk to our portfolio companies, we do this community marketing jumpstart. You really want to start here. There are a lot of different user profiles potentially that you may want to bring into your community, but again, you really want to understand where the white space is and whether there is not a community that's currently serving these customers and these different user profiles. So you want to prioritize these. You want to take a look at the segment, bucket these out. Also, just generally the value proposition, right? What can our community offer to this segment that nobody else can? So you want to really do your market research and stress test it. If there are any job titles of these people that fall into the segment for targeting, definitely want to flag those. Your fit, high, medium, low, whether it's a large opportunity size or small. And then what are they just focused on accomplishing? What are their pain points? And then finally, do you have the infrastructure and content to be able to really go to market and attract this profile? So this can allow you to enable you to figure out exactly who you should target to get your community started. Then once you've really determined your segment, you think, okay, this is a compelling segment that I want to target for my community. you're going to need some tools and some foundations, right? So we've kind of laid out in 4 different categories. One's obviously a CRM, a CMS, and a map. A lot of companies obviously have these in place already. So it's just obviously the core marketing automation platform and tools that your company would use even for an enterprise sale. However, what we do see is that companies do tend to splinter out different, since community is a bit more volume and velocity and less around getting user adoption for the community and have separate goals. Companies generally don't want to pollute their Marketo instance or Pardot instance or HubSpot with user community data. So they'll convert over opportunities when it's actually a real sale, because then you're going to have to pay more for the record maintenance, et cetera. So just something to consider as you think through this. Community platform, generally our portfolio companies use Discourse. There's also Intuitive and Tribe, which have different integrations that Discourse doesn't necessarily support. Engagement tools, these are your virtual events, webinars platforms, Zoom, Slack. We see Discord increasing in usage as well. The unit economics can be a little bit more appealing to Slack, or sometimes you're targeting a user base that generally enjoys Discord. And then finally, analytics and measurement. Can't help but give Mac a shout out here on the Commsor side, but then obviously the reality is that community marketing is a bit from the analytics perspective. You're going to kind of have to pave your own path a little bit here. So we also, Orbit's in option and so segment and Zapier. So we've seen companies kind of hack it together that way. Sometimes you just use a spreadsheet when you get started. So, okay. Activating the community to drive the business impact. So we've talked about, the foundations, how to think about getting the community started. Now let's move over to think about once you have a community up and running, how do you connect that to drive impact for your business? So the key goals of Enroll of your organization within a community, it's kind of funny. It's so different from a top-down sale or traditional demand gen where you're going out to market, you're trying to, you have messaging, you're targeting, you're actively pushing it. For a community, you want to take a very hands-off approach and you want to build and maintain infrastructure for a sustainable ecosystem. 2 is publishing the relevant content, including the thought leadership best practices and up-to-date technical documentation that the community would want to engage with. 3 is just then going out to market, attracting influencers and activating them through engagement. You want to create authentic and value-add interactions. This isn't about selling right now. This is about connecting people who are different levels of interest and education within the market and really want to learn more and understand it. So people who are highly influential can attract other people in the market who are just getting started. So you definitely want to leverage influencers to do that. And then finally is collecting insights. So this is key. One of the key points of community is that you have access to so much data in terms of different use cases, different engagement, et cetera. So you can use those to inform your product roadmap, messaging, and your demand gen as well. So definitely net positive here. So this is through a company out there called Orbit. We really like this. We think it's really interesting to see some companies start to adopt this. When you think about the community, it's really at the center of all these different rings of people around your community. And then affinity, you're kind of measuring your community by 2 different metrics. One is affinity and one is influence. So affinity is a member's level of engagement with the community. This can be measured by collecting data against the key activities that are creating value, right? So if they attended a user conference, hosting a virtual event, contributing technical documentation, et cetera, those should have different affinity scores to understand whether people are engaged with you or not. Then there's influence, right? So different community members are going to have a sphere of influence, and that's based on their reputation, credibility, and the size and quality of their audience in the ecosystem. So you really want to look at people who have high influence. It could be their job title at a company that's particularly in the space. They may have a big following on Twitter. They may actively do thought leadership contributions. Maybe they wrote a book on the subject, right? Another one you can look at is open source projects that they've created and if they have traction on GitHub, for example. So if they have high influence, they're going to pull different members who are just on the outside looking in further and further to the center. And then when you think about your marketing for the community, you really want to segment the community into different levels, right? So on the outside, you have your observers who are looking in. Then you have your participants, your contributors, advocates. Advocates are your closest to the center. Those are the ones that you want to have the most influence, and they're attracting everyone else into the middle. But each of these different levels is going to qualify for different marketing. So generally, if you're on the outside, it's just content to raise awareness. The further and further you get more closer to the center, the more attractive and interesting the programs become. So you may invite them to a user forum, and then if you're in the next level in, they may qualify for company swag, et cetera. And the great thing is you segment this out by the affinity score, right? So if you're taking a look at activities they're taking, you can calculate different scores based on the data that you're pulling in to be able to segment out your marketing programs appropriately. So this is a kind of a real world example of what that might look like. So how does this relate to PLG, right? So we just talked about community, right? We've gone into detail about how to think about it, how to score it. So community really powers that organic PLG flywheel. So when you think about the flywheel, you're going to have different community tools and programs, your technical documentation, your Discord, your forums. For a scaling company, you may have training and tutorials, a YouTube, a user conference, et cetera. Those are going to live in this flywheel, which is going to drive demand. So for customers that are looking for your product, the infrastructure and tools such as the technical documentation, your social media, et cetera, are going to help them find and discover your company. Once you get them into that funnel, then your community edition is going to provide very low friction ways to try your product and get into it. Then the forums and the Discord are going to be able to provide the support that they need to convert. And then finally, once they've converted and have become customers, you have all the meetups and events to nurture and speaking opportunities. That's all going to create content, which is going to funnel back to the find and discover. So it creates this nice flywheel effect where you're out in market, you're attracting people, you get them into the product through low friction ways. Then you nurture retention and excitement for your product, and then that's going to create more content and data to attract more people. So here's an example of what this looks like. So Postman is a portfolio company, and they have this awesome public API network. This really, they take a very editorial approach to it, and it's created by community members and customers alike. They actually recently held a community hackathon to develop innovative APIs, and winners are now public and featured at the top of the network page. This API network has helped fuel PR content, their social media. They even, because it is such an open collaboration system, they even have customers like PayPal, for example, who have written their own case studies about how they are leveraging the platform. So a lot of earned media to get out there and generate overall interest and demand for their products. So further down the funnel, getting people to try it, once you kind of have your buyer's attention, Mural, for example, has really built out a robust content ecosystem to educate customers who now are, have some awareness, and then really incentivizing them to try. If you look at all of their content, there's a lot of call to actions and really getting, raising awareness of the trial. The other thing they do is they have these pre-populated templates based on buyer use cases. It empowers the users to really self-select into the different flows to understand how the product applies to their use cases. And then just overall, their trial is very, very low friction. It's really easy to get set up. They don't have a lot of long and complicated web forms there. Another thing that they do, again, going back to the influencers, they really curate industry experts, current customers, and academics for weekly webinars about the subject matter. So, bringing in people who have influence in the space and having them talk about different topics. And again, that raises awareness, but then also provides value for current customers as well. So here is the key. And this is really where the data becomes the most interesting. So it really is on the marketing and the go-to-market teams to build the bridge between the end user and the buyer. So the user community will give your organization access to valuable data, content, and the intelligence to inform your demand gen motion. So on the left, you can see your community marketing, you're acquiring end users, you get that bottom product adoption. On the right, you see is your traditional kind of product-led growth demand gen. You're targeting more economic buyers. And for those, you're going to be looking for at product trials and pipeline dollar. The data, content, the use cases, the reviews, the referrals are all different data points and ammunition to kind of drive and connect the dots for your demand gen engine. So that's why the community marketing, it can be so valuable. But obviously, it's on the organization to really build a very clean bridge between those two things. We'll talk about that. An example of this is just user invitations. So it will enable sharing and spread your product virally through target organizations. If you can pull this one off, postmonday.com and Mural. We love Mural on this webinar, but actually I think Mural is really interesting because it's not like a super developer heavy persona. They're a little bit more broad market based, and they've done a great job with their community. But you can see, because you invite your team into the Monday instance or the Mural instance, it provides pathways to other teams within the organization. Now, once you've done that, once you see different pockets of demand in the community, you really want to lead score them. So we have some definitions here on a TQL. That's matching the customer's ideal profile. You want to set a threshold for that. And whether the lead has exceeded the score predetermined by in-product actions to accurately signal the purchase intent. So you're going to be looking at the firmographic and technographic. So if people in your community have corporate email addresses, or match the overall ICP, and you can start seeing user adoption within your target customer profiles. And then finally, behavioral, right? What are they actually doing in the product itself? So creating a profile, they're inviting team members, building that first workflow, et cetera. And that will calculate your overall lead scoring to really understand whether community efforts are driving product qualified leads for your business. Once you get them into the trial, the nurture strategy is key. This is kind of a area where companies tend to invest in last. I would invest first. So thinking about your notifications and what that customer journey looks like, and both your notifications and emails should really work in tandem to generate those TQL lead scoring pieces here. It's great to have a lead scoring model, but if you don't have the automation and the marketing to actually kind of drive it through, this is a critical piece of the funnel, and definitely something that should be started with to drive customers to convert. And how you do this is really, some companies use gamification, right? So Nearpod, for example, rewards users for completing tasks or continued usage. It could be some other milestones, just raising awareness. People love email recaps of the different points and the stats that they've accumulated in the product. So it also provides clear reminders of what they've achieved and gets them back into the product. You can also offer prizes if you want. Again, physical goods, t-shirts. You'd be amazed how far swag goes. I'm sure Tomer's got some pretty good war stories about how that's worked for him. So I'll defer to him on some of those tactics. So to summarize, really, when you think about your PLG marketing, you really want to actively engage your user to use your product, and that will increase your conversion probability at the end of your trial or free edition. So one is just establishing a predictable cadence of communication. Proactively nudging your customer, users push notifications, strong onboarding that sets clear expectation, keeps them in the loop and top of mind. People get distracted very easily, right? So it's important to keep people focused and moving. Two is marketing product really needs to be fully integrated. So marketing needs to be triggered based on in-product behaviors and lead score values. Both of those teams really need to work hand in hand to pipe those data points in. Three is quantifying your user progress and proactively communicate. Again, as I mentioned, people love stats, summaries, milestone celebrations, getting them back in, incentivize that further usage. Again, people do get very distracted, so it's important to keep them on task. Four is actively testing new messaging programs. So, don't set it and forget it. Once you check something off, you should always be looking at your performance and understand how you can improve your performance. And then finally, really just engage your customer. I mean, this sounds like so basic, but it's true. You may have enterprise grade software, but we're seeing more and more, especially for, as you're going for a more community marketing motion, enterprise grade software really doesn't have to be boring. So you can try to have some fun with it and get your users involved. So that wraps up my section. I'm going to pass it off to Tomer, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to actually put this into action in some use cases. Tomer, I think it's funny. Usually when I give this talk, I usually have a Dremio example spot, kind of positioned within it to show how you guys do it. But since we actually have you on the phone for this one, I figured it'd be better to let you talk about it.
Sounds like a plan.
We want to launch the polls. They are loaded if we want to use.
Oh, amazing! All right, so yeah, let's take a minute. We'll just launch all the polls now and just do it, and then let's just take a pause there. Okay.
Okay, wonderful. First one's coming up now.
Okay, so the question is, what is the current stage of your organization's community? Our community, kind of self-driving, you're getting some traction, you're looking at initial pilot, you're evaluating it, or you may not just have anything in the hopper right now. You're just here to learn a little bit more about it. So love to learn more about that. Let's give it a minute. Okay. Great. So you can see most people are starting to seriously evaluate, or they're just here to learn. So that's great. Let's do the next one. Okay. So what tools and programs are you leveraging to nurture your engagement? So we talked about some of this. So if you do have your community up and running, technical documentation you should be able to select multiple. So just everything that you're currently using, love to understand, what is the most popular. Just give it a minute. Okay. Number 1, webinars. We have number 2, technical documentation. People are using there. Meetup, yep, very popular. Community forum, we have some user conference as well. Unsurprisingly, community or open source edition is a little less adoption, but about 13% of people that are doing something around that. So that's pretty impressive. All right, final poll, and then we'll move on. So how are you currently measuring the business impact of your community? And it could be multiple choice again. So any of these that you're looking at. So maybe you don't have KPIs, which I think is pretty typical. It's just about, or it's important strategic positioning, but could be looking at community size growth, could be looking at engagement, maybe even on community influence pipeline dollar. Love to hear a little bit more of people's focus here as they build the community out. All right, so yeah, so more strategic initiatives, community size growth is about what we expected, some pipeline dollar there, and engagement, not so much influence or lead gen currently today. Very cool, great, thank you so much. Tomer, I'm gonna let you take it away.
All right, thank you. So I figured I would just start with one slide, just tell you who I am or what Dremio is, since many of you are probably not coming from the data space. So Dremio is a SQL lakehouse, and what that means is we enable companies to run their BI workloads, so things like dashboards, Tableau, Power BI, Looker, things like that, directly on data lake storage, so systems like S3 and ADLS. And the idea really is to eliminate the need for proprietary and expensive data warehouses, so you don't have to go through all that pain of kind of moving data into a warehouse and creating lots of copies and extracts and cubes and so forth. Companies in that growth phase, we've been growing over 100% every year since the beginning, and in the last year we raised 200 million, and some of that has come from Insight. Lastly, we also invest a lot in open source and community, and that's one of the things I'll talk about today. And so we've created a couple open source projects, and we also run a great conference. So the first thing I think when you think about community is, well, what are you building the community around, right? There can be a number of different things as a company that you have an opportunity to build community around. And so the first one really is, are you part of some new stack or some new architecture that is emerging and that there is excitement around? And maybe you're creating that excitement as well. And so we've seen a lot of examples of this in kind of history. There was the LAMP stack. There's something called the Jam stack for static websites. Back in the days when Hadoop was an exciting things in big data, there was a whole stack of technologies and projects you could use there. And so I'll talk about an example here for us, which is that we're part of this new kind of open architecture for analytics. The second opportunity you have, of course, is your own product, right? So be able to create that kind of community of users of the product, right? So this really, of course, requires like Whit was talking about, a critical volume of users, right? People that use the product, and then is there enough meat to kind of warrant a conversation around it, right? So even if you do have a lot of users, it might be hard to build a community. Say, on my iPhone, I have a calendar app, right? And a lot of people use that calendar app with the iOS, but whether you could really build a community around that might be a hard thing, right? And then finally, maybe within your product, you've built some building blocks that are not just kind of internal implementation components of your own product, but are also things that other people use. And often that takes the form of some open source library or some open source kind of building block that you've created that has become popular, and that you have an opportunity to kind of create mindshare and create community around that piece of your product as well. So looking at these 3 examples for us at Dremio, and this is where I'll kind of use our company as an example of how we leverage these types of things. The first one is this new stack, right? So this open data architecture. And just briefly, and kind of what's going on in our world is you have this kind of shift that's happening in the industry from closed data architectures to the kind of open data architecture, right? So similar to app development, where it's gone from monolithic to kind of microservices, we see that happening in the world of data analytics, where the kind of the traditional approach, every data warehouse, every database has its own storage, and those are kind of siloed from each other and independent of each other. To really this new architecture, some call it the lake house, some call it the cloud data lake, but fundamentally it's one where you have kind of a common data tier. The data is its own tier. It's stored in open formats, and you have a variety of different engines you can use on top of that. Things like Dremio and Databricks and Confluent, Kafka, lots of open source projects you can use. So it really shifts that kind of the entire architecture for data analytics in the cloud. And so this gives us an opportunity to create a community around kind of this new architecture and create excitement around this new architecture. And one of the ways we do that is by having a conference. And so we started this conference called Subsurface or Subsurface Live. The name comes from the world of data lakes that we live in. So kind of diving under the surface of that data lake. And so this is a conference. Actually, the next one is July 21, so coming up here. And we do this every 6 months. And this has really grown to now over 10,000 attendees. It's virtual because we started it during kind of the early days of COVID. What you'll find if you go to that website is that we have a lot of speakers here, and they're not all talking about Dremio. So they're talking about a variety of different technologies in this stack. And that includes everything from kind of the query execution engines to the different open source projects that represent kind of the data formats. It includes how data is transported over the wire, different visualization tools, things like Superset, which is an open source BI tool, various orchestration tools, things like Airflow and Prefect and Dagster and things like that. So lots of different technologies that are kind of represented at this conference. And so that creates a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity for people to come and learn at this event, and not just learn about our own product, but learn about kind of this new shift that's happening in all the different players and components in this stack. So it's a great opportunity for people out there in the community to come and kind of educate themselves. And then it also, for us as a company, it really draws people to kind of engage with Dremio that maybe hadn't even heard about us or weren't even thinking about wanting to learn about Dremio, because now they're coming to our conference really to learn about a variety of different things, right? Even if they're using some competitor of ours, this conference is still relevant to them. And so that's one of the kind of strategic reasons for doing this. One of the other things that it does is it creates a lot of content, right? So that content has kind of a longer shelf life than the conference itself. So that's in terms of the kind of the creating that community around the bigger stack. But we also do a lot of things to create community around the product itself. And one of the kind of the very common examples that many companies use, and we do as well, is we have a forum, right? So when users of our product, and especially our community edition, which is our free version, they use the product, they don't have enterprise support. They don't have a phone number they can call 24/7, but they do have these forums here that they can come to and engage and ask questions. And many times, you'll see somebody from Dremio answering a question, but often you'll also see people in the community answering these questions. And so the forums, I think people often think about them as kind of this very narrow tool that is just for kind of Q&A, but really there's a lot of benefits to having a forum like this, right? It drives more engagement for your users. It leads to kind of collaboration. It helps from an SEO standpoint, because now you've basically outsourced content creation to your users. And so if you have 10 people or dozens of people posting every day, well, that's a lot of content that's getting created that you're not paying for, right? And it's this content that really kind of attracts that long tail of Google searches, right? People are searching for this weird thing that you never would have built a web page to optimize for that, but because you have this very vibrant community, this very vibrant forum, you're able to capture those searches. A more kind of targeted approach in terms of kind of community, and this really it really focuses more on the advocates for your product in the community, is things like third-party review sites. So this is an example from G2 Crowd, where we have various reviews from people that use the product, and they come and kind of express their thoughts, their opinions, their rankings, right? Very similar to what you see on Amazon when you have reviews of a product. So this is more geared towards kind of enterprise and SaaS products. And so that's an important thing to focus on as well. Often you have to kind of set up some incentives for people to go in and write these reviews. You can't tell them how to rank you or what to write, but you can kind of incent them to at least go in and put in the effort to submit something. And then finally, the concept of building blocks, and this might not be relevant to every company out there, but if you do have something within your product that is of interest to others, not because it's your product, but just because it's something that you've built and other people use as well, that's also an opportunity to create some community around that building block. So for us, this means these open source projects that we've created or co-created over the years. And these are basically components of our product that we, for strategic reasons, decided to open source. One example of this is the Aero Project, which is basically a cross-language development platform for in-memory analytics. So we early on, we took our internal memory format and we said, wouldn't it be nice if our Dremio's internal memory format was an industry standard? Everybody used that, and that would long-term have some strategic advantages for us, where we could more kind of integrate better with various systems. And so we open sourced that, and fast forward a few years, it's very widely adopted, over $20 million a month, right? So that's one example. Aeroflight's another example that we're very much focused on right now, which is kind of extending Aero so that different components, different processes and applications can kind of communicate with each other at much higher rates than what was previously possible. And that, again, is something we're doing in open source. And then finally, Nessie is our most recent kind of open source project, which is really about providing a Git-like experience for data. So in the same way that with when you're using Git to write code, you can create branches and you can do version control of your source code. Nessie provides that for data, and that's another thing that we've done as an open source project, really more for reasons of enabling tighter integration, right? One of the benefits of open source is that it makes it easier for you to integrate with various projects and companies that are out there. But one of the benefits of having these things is that you can start to create a community around these building blocks. And so in the example of Apache Aero, that's downloaded over 20 million times a month now, and that basically from the days that we open source that and kind of collaborated with others in the community to do that, and that's really taken off. So every data scientist that uses Python now uses Aero. And one of the things you'll find if you go to the contributors list on GitHub is that the vast majority of contributions now are not from our engineers, right? So these are things that we're not paying for, but the excitement around the project and the amount of visibility that we get because of it is significant, right? And so that sometimes it actually, there are various different benefits to contributing something that you've done to open source. So the last thing I want to talk about, beyond kind of the different types of communities that the different things you can build a community around, is also how to think about kind of building that community or bootstrapping it. So when you think about each of these, platforms or websites or events, whether it's a conference or your blog, or it's your forums, there's always the question of, okay, how do I get started here, right? And in any of these kind of platforms, you could think of it as consumers and producers. So there are consumers. These are the people that are consuming the content, right? They are reading the posts on your forum. They're reading articles on your blog post. They're attending your conference because they want to listen to some talk. Maybe they're using some open source technology that you've created, right? So these are consumers, and these are folks in the community. And then you have the producers, and these are the people that are they're actually creating the content. So on your forum, they're responding to posts. Maybe they're contributing blogs to your blog, or they're at your conference, or as you saw for us, we now have sponsors at our conference. So these could be companies that are sponsoring the conference, or maybe they're contributing to your open source project. So if you think about the world, kind of the community as consumers and producers, and this is really fits into the model Whit was talking about with kind of the 4 tiers. If you kind of split that into kind of just 2, then you have these 2 groups. And there's always a question of, well, of course, everybody wants to have lots of people in the community as producers, right? We want lots of people writing valuable blog posts on our blog, right? And we want everybody to be posting great answers on our forum. But that's not typically how it starts, right? And sometimes it doesn't even get there at all. So the way I encourage people to think about this is to think about it in 2 phases. And in phase 1, really, it's your company that is the producer, right? So you're the one responding to posts on your forum, and you're the one writing blogs or posts on your blog. You're the one speaking at the conference. And in our first conference, we did have a lot of speakers from the outside, but we actually didn't have any sponsors, or maybe we had a handful of maybe 4 or 5 sponsors, right? Because it was the first one. It was hard to convince anybody to sponsor, and it was hard to get great speakers in the first one. But now that it's our second or our third conference, and we have 10,000 people attending, I can tell you it's actually pretty easy to attract speakers to the conference, because who doesn't want to get the word out to 10,000 people, and who doesn't want to sponsor an event like that with 10,000 attendees? And so it always starts with yourself kind of being the sole producer, and that's something that you should embrace and actually be okay with, and look at how do you fund that, how do you assign people to do that. But if you do it right, then over time, a lot of these things, not all of them, can actually start being kind of a flywheel. They can start, getting to a point where the consumers actually start becoming producers as well. Obviously, a small portion of them, but that's really all you need. And so, just think about these things in 2 phases, and that makes it a lot easier. And you don't get frustrated. Oh, why aren't other people responding on my forum? All right, so that's what I had. Hopefully, that was helpful, and I'll hand it back here to Whit.
Amazing. Thank you, Tomer. So cool, and just really very actionable. Matt, I'm going to introduce Mac, CEO of Commsor, is going to talk more about measurement and connecting some of these community actions, and how do you get buy-in in your business, and how do you measure success? Mac, take it away.
Awesome. Let me share my screen here to get my slides up. Here we go. Quick little introduction on where my, I guess, expertise and thoughts here are coming from. As mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Commsor. We're building tools for community-led companies like the Community OS and Meetsy. We just raised an A round back in January, and put our product out in market the same month. On top of that, we also run a community called the Community Club, which has actually quickly become one of the largest communities for community professionals in the world. So that's where our actual community building, we're very much, getting high on our own supply, if you will, building a community rather than just building a product for the community space. Whoops, there we go. So I'm gonna start with some sort of some groundwork here that might overlap a little bit with what has already been mentioned, but it's all part of the presentation, that when you're not investing in community, you have this self-fulfilling prophecy where there's a lack of understanding, which leads to a lack of ability to measure community, which leads to a lack of ability of proving impact of community, which in turn leads to the lack of investment. And community building is a little bit of taking that leap of faith, because unlike other functions in a business like sales, marketing, things like that, it's a lot harder to linearly understand the value of just putting $1 in, getting $2 out. It's much more of a involved, organic, slightly open-ended process, which is where a lot of companies make the mistake of investing in community. I've seen a lot of companies say they're launching community, they hire a community manager, they open a forum, they spin up some events. 6 months later, they haven't proved the impact and they shut it all down and say, see, community was a failure. So you have to be able to understand why you're investing in it and how you're investing. Otherwise, you'll get sucked into this cycle. The old way. Community used to be historically this thing that bounced around at companies. People weren't quite sure if it was product or sales or success or marketing. Where should community live? Was it one? Was it the other? Even today, you go and ask community managers, who have you reported to historically? You will hear pretty much every department that is possible at a company. But now we're finally seeing this evolution where community is actually becoming more than just a thing that sits next to product and sales and success and marketing, and actually becoming this core that sits between all these things and actually acts as like a thread through an entire community-led business. And community itself is its own flywheel and has to exist for the sake of community itself. You can't build community to drive sales or to drive marketing or to reduce support costs. Community has to exist for a broader purpose, and those benefits will spin out of that in a more organic way. So before I jump into kind of the second half of my presentation here, talk about how like we at Commsor define community from a business perspective. We define it as 4 different layers of community. Obviously a little bit of overlap with previous things, but we think about it more from a holistic business perspective than just a community perspective, with market, external or audience, customer or member, and internal. And I'll go a bit deeper into each of those real quick. So internal community is your company. That's the core of your community, right? And there's more and more we see that individuals within companies actually impact community outside of the business, the application of community-led principles internally, probably the least interesting one for those of you here. Customer community or member community. This is what's traditionally considered community in a lot of companies. These are people that are gathering on your forums, on your Slack, attending your events. They're kind of part of your spaces that you are creating. This is what's traditionally owned by a community team. And I use Figma here on the right as an example for like what these different levels might look like for a company. For Figma, it's their Slack, their events, their local user groups, their ambassador programs, things like that. One layer up, you have your external or your audience community. This is more of like the social media, the marketing, the content marketing, things like that, where they might not be gathering on spaces, and that line between audience and community starts to get blurred. But that's one layer up. For Figma, that's their Twitter, their Instagram, their education programs, their email newsletter, etc. And then you have market community. That's basically the entire market in which your business exists. So for Figma, people talking about Figma on Reddit/r web design or on design Twitter or on Dribbble, those are all part of Figma's community, even if they're not necessarily engaging with Figma directly or on channels that Figma owns or controls. And yeah, so community is about authentic relationships. And when it comes to data and KPIs, it can help you understand a community, but data won't build a community for you. It can be a bridge, though, between community and other functions to help you prove the value of community for the entire organization. It was in the poll, I know a lot of you had mentioned that the main KPI you're using for measuring your community is size of community. And a little call here that from our perspective, that's a bit of the cardinal sin of community data. I know folks that have 200, 300, 400 person communities that can justify that it's driving millions of dollars of value of business for their company, and others that have hundreds of thousands of members in their community and they can't put a number on the impact that's actually having for their business. So there's also like negative network effects as communities get too big. So size of community isn't always the right way to measure the success and the outcome of community. So going back to this little flywheel we've put together here, where we have community at the core and it's spinning off benefits for all these pieces, I'm going to go a bit deeper into the different ways you can think about community overlapping with each of these different functions. Actually, before I do that, I forgot the order of my own slides. Using comparative metrics, not point in time, to tell a story is how you're going to prove the value to the rest of the business. If you're a community manager, you're working on community, and you have 5,000 people in a forum, and you go to your head of marketing or your head of sales or your CEO, and you're like, we get 5,000 members. Their reaction very likely is going to be, okay, as the head of sales, why do I care about that? So you have to find the way to like convert the language of community into language that the rest of the company will understand and tell a comparative story. Whether that's, account value goes up when they join the community, churn rate goes down, NPS goes up, number of support tickets goes down. Depending on the community, some of these metrics will be applicable to you, some of them will not. And finding those ways to convert that story into something the rest of the company will understand and care about will be the best way to prove the impact of community. And I don't know where my image is there. Oh, there we go. Just took a second to load there. So as far as community and product, here's a great quote from one of the co-founders of Linear. Without a continuous feedback channel like the Slack community, we'd probably build the wrong things. So community can be a great way, especially early on, to understand and get feedback from super users, early adopters, things like that. And it can, for product feedback, user research, for open source development. There's huge amounts of implications there that very often, I know the primary purpose of this presentation is talking about, sales and marketing and growth, but product feedback is actually a huge thing you'll get from bringing people together to intentionally talk about your product, and actually enabling them to talk to each other about your product will unlock ideas and feedback that previously were not accessible. Community-led sales, obviously a big one here. It's no longer about driving sales. You're not building the community for the sake of sales. You're building a relationship, as Whitney mentioned quite strongly around. You're building a relationship, and the sale will kind of happen organically for that. As an example, at Commsor, 90% of our customers to date have come in through our community, where they actually joined our community, built a relationship there, and then organically came in for the product. It's very similar to product-led growth. Sign up for the free trial, try the product out, then upgrade. It's just about putting like human relationship into that process. So it can drive community qualified leads, pre-sales relationships, and I mean, a whole host of other benefits. Community qualified leads, I think Whitney mentioned this briefly, but the way we look at it at Commsor is taking more traditional lead scoring and then combining that with engagement scoring. So looking at not just, are they potentially a customer through, industry, role, size, things like that, but how are they engaging with you? And at what threshold have they been warmed enough by the community that they could actually become a customer? If you, I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced this, but I know I have in the past, where you join a community for a company and the first thing you get is like the LinkedIn request from a salesperson, like, hey, I saw you join our Slack. You want to buy our product? Like, destroys the community pretty much instantly. So the idea of community qualified leads is let the community warm the leads for you. It's kind of similar to like, it's almost like an evolution of content marketing, right? But old sales would be like, hey, do you want to buy our product? No. Okay, I'll come back in 3 months. Hey, do you want to buy our product now? Okay, no, I'll come back in 3 months. You try again. Content marketing was like, okay, let's give them some value. Maybe they'll buy our product. Okay, give them some more value. Maybe they'll buy our product. Whereas community-led sales is about continually building that value. So for us, for example, at Commsor, when we try to sell to someone, if they're not ready to buy right now, we don't say, okay, reach out to you in 6 months. We invite them to our community, and very, very often within 3 to 6 months, they'll organically reach back out on their own because they've now spent 3 to 6 months building a relationship with us, even though they weren't ready to buy originally. Yeah, don't let your SDRs use your community list as an outreach list. That will destroy. Once again, community cannot exist for the sake of sales. It has to exist for the sake of the community. There has to be a bigger why besides your product. For support and success, community can be the first line of defense for your support teams. Ticket deflection, customer education, customer satisfaction, using the community to both reduce tickets. Like, we're working with a customer right now. We were able to show them that their average customer sent 3 support tickets per quarter, but when they joined their community, on average, that dropped to 1. You can now start to put an actual dollar value to support reduction that community is driving for you. And I'm trying to wrap up here, see if we can get a few moments of Q&A in here. Community and marketing, this is one of the ones that's a little harder to put an actual number on or a KPI, but building a community in your space helps with brand building, thought leadership, content development. You'll get content ideas from the community. You'll be able to leverage the community, create content with you. And it also, imagine like, for us, we own Community Club. It's like one of the best communities for communities in the world right now. So people start to associate Community Club and Commsor's brand and just community as a broader brand in the community space. And it's a good transition to building a broader community. So the old way was the idea of a community of support. You would buy the product first, then you join the community. And usually it's only appealing to customers, limited conversation. It's usually used for like product support, issues, bug reporting, things like that. Whereas a community of interest broadens the scope and actually allows the community to become the first touch point for your customers. So like for Commsor, people don't buy Commsor and then join the community club. They join the community club and then buy Commsor. It flips the script and it allows you to appeal to a broader market. There are thousands of members in our community that will never be Commsor customers. They're just not a good fit for what we're building, but they provide value to the rest of the community members who could and be and are Commsor customers. It allows us to create thought leadership in the space. It can still contain that community of support within it, and it allows us to actually give the community its own voice. It's no longer the Commsor community. It's its own brand, its own voice, its own identity. And I'll end here is that community is the cross-functional core for your company. It's not a thing you bolt on. It's something that has to be an entire mindset to how you build your company, how you build sales, how you build marketing. It's a thread through every department at your company.
Oh my Lord, I'm just like so inspired listening to both of you. It's insane. I spent a lot of time in the portfolio. We're talking about some of these things. So it's just so great to hear from both of you about this. So thank you so much for your presentations and your insights. Super, super valuable. We had one question in the chat that I want to make sure we cover. I also had a couple other questions, but if people have some questions, I know we've got like 2 minutes. So Tomer, how do you measure and track adoption of open source? I think you had a slide specifically on how you were doing that, but just wanted to kind of tie that out off, just make sure that we answered that.
You know, there's not always an easy way, but obviously, if the open source thing is something that you control, like in the case of for us, Project Nessie, that is something that we control. It's our own GitHub kind of repo, and we can see usage kind of metrics on that. For other projects, if it's owned by if it's like an Apache project, the Apache Software Foundation, then you can get kind of logs, and in our case, because we also package it as a Python build, then you can get from the PyPy repository. There's metrics for downloads there that you can actually download and get all that data. So it depends on exactly the type of open source project and where it's hosted, how you would actually get those metrics.
And we also have a question just rolled in. What are the best tools to track influence? I've got a couple of opinions here. Mac, I'd love to hear your feedback as well. Sometimes you just go out and you collect the data manually. You look at people who are, you search Twitter, you look within the space, and you pull it all together into a spreadsheet. That's just one thing you can do to kind of brute force it and understand exactly who's influential within the target segments that you're doing. Another one is obviously there's a free tool called Orbit, which we've seen some companies use. Max, is something that Commsor supports, or do you have some other opinions as well?
Yeah, something we support. I think there's a lot of social listening tools if you're specifically trying to track it on social channels that do it as well. So I think it depends on what you're defining influence as and where specifically you're trying to track it. There's kind of 5 or 6 different categories of influence that would change my answer there depending.
Yeah, 100%. We're at time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, an awesome conversation, a lot of great insights here. And we're excited. The nice thing about the community marketing and PLG, everything's changing rapidly, right? There's new players, there's new tools. It's still very early days, I feel, for this motion. And I think Mac really hit it home appropriately, where it really has to be a strategic initiative that your company's bought into. Can't just be a bolt-on, right? So I'm looking forward to seeing how everyone applies some of this and go out there and start building some communities and driving some business.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.